Welcome,
Hello.
everybody. we are doing the Collector's Cash mid-season showdown, and this is round one.
Welcome to the Thunderdome.
Welcome to the Thunderdome.
Have Ethan Simpson versus Preston Chew for you. You got Ethan on the left side, using that Tapu, Koko, Suicune, Amoonguss, Incineroar, Celesteela, and Salamence. Looks like the same team he was running yesterday.
Indeed.
Gardevoir, Landorus, Politoed, Zapdos, Aegislash, and Incineroar.
All right, so we got to see a little bit yesterday, Ethan playing against a little bit of rain, and it'll be interesting to see how he deals with rain today. Rain was pretty fun yesterday. We got to see some memes yesterday.
Preston's team looked really similar to what Toller used at 2015 Nationals when he won. I think Toller had Thundurus over Zapdos and then Scrafty over Incineroar. But otherwise the other four Pokemon are the same, so it's kind of cool. For our release, I'm sure y'all talked about that a bunch yesterday, but the Intimidate Incineroar is going to be pretty cool.
Honestly, we've seen a lot of variation with the Intimidate Incineroars lately. I mean, we've seen Berry Incineroar, and we've seen Assault Vest Incineroar. We've seen bulkier Incineroars, even just outside of, once we saw the Assault Vest getting knocked off, we saw different variations in how people were training their Incineroars. And then, I don't know, everything that we've seen with these Incineroars has been really crazy, just to see how popular it is and how people are changing things up.
It definitely threw a pretty big wrench into the metagame. It was completely random. Like I woke up one day and everyone was freaking out on Twitter, like, "Oh my gosh, Intimidate Incineroar!" I was like, "Oh, cool."
We've been dreaming about this for ages, and then
it just like dropped it without even telling us.
No warning. So the Intimidate Incineroar mirrors have been really popular in Kansas City the last few days, and it looks like we've got some graphical glitches going on the stream, so we do apologize about that. We'll try and get that fixed between the rounds. Probably not going to be able to fix it this round, so please bear with us here. But yeah, seeing the Intimidates go off on both sides here, and then we've got double Fairy, double Incineroar.
The shiny Incineroar on Ethan's end. I warned him not to use it because I would publicly shame him, but you know, he decided to stick with it, and this is me shaming you, Ethan.
This is for everybody now. Everybody gets to hear it. This will be uploaded, on the VODs, the YouTubes, the Twitches.
My first public call out for shiny Incineroar, Ethan Simpson.
For shame.
Incineroar on Ethan's end looking pretty good here. The Gardevoir and Incineroar on Preston's end don't really threaten it a whole lot, like at all.
Mm-hmm. And we're going to see another Intimidate come in, the nice lazy Susan of Intimidates here. So Landorus actually puts on a decent amount of pressure. We don't know if this is Scarf because it came in, obviously, at the beginning of the turn. So we can't check the speeds there, but that's something that Ethan's going to have to pay attention to. Even if it isn't Scarf, this could be something that's like Assault Vest. So even so, this Tapu Koko is not in a great position. Oh, and we've got the Electrium Z!
Yeah.
Oh, buddy. Oh, this could be either great or terrible.
Great use of the Z move here. And it wasn't a bad choice, but it's going to get blown into either an immunity or a Protect here, and it looks like it is going to hit that Gardevoir through Protect.
I mean, honestly, I get kind of excited every time we see that huge wind-up for, Z move, and then it doesn't affect it.
I know.
We do see at least a little bit of chip damage on Gardevoir, which is helpful.
It's smart Protect on Preston's end, because now the Gardevoir is going to be faster than Incineroar. It'll be slower than Koko most likely, but Koko won't be able to knock it out, so Gardevoir's going to be able to get a Hyper Voice or a Psychic off here.
Yeah, and if Preston was watching the stream yesterday, he would have had a little bit of extra information just seeing that Ethan was using an Electrium Z Koko, and we do see that Tapu Koko is going before this Landorus, so it's probably not Choice Scarf unless it's hitting a really awkward speed tier. But Ethan making a great decision to try and get an Intimidate on this Landorus, and then, bringing out Amoonguss, which has been kind of the bread and butter of this team.
Looks good here, especially because very unlikely that a Psychic comes into that slot, considering Incineroar was there before. Most likely going to see just Hyper Voice here, yeah.
Yeah. and that's not going to do a terrible amount to Amoonguss, which is pretty nice for Ethan. And now he's got recycled Fake Out, so he can choose what he wants to hit. And Gardevoir, I mean, we saw the amount of damage that Gardevoir has taken here, already below half, and not known for its high defensive stat.
Right.
Even something like Fake Out is going to do a decent chunk.
Yeah, no, Fake Out won't really be appreciated by its Gardevoir. It's got that Protect option like we saw, so wouldn't be surprised to see that come out. But the Landorus, even though it isn't -1, it's not really in a bad spot, I'd say. If it has that U-turn option, that's a pretty free switch. But no, he does just said to hard switch it out.
So again, our lazy Susan of Intimidate's just coming around. Like, I can't steal people's catchphrases, right? Like, we could have the revolving door, but I feel like that's already been trademarked. So we're going with the lazy Susan of Intimidates on both sides. On both sides. So the Salamence is coming out here, and I think that Ethan, looking at this and seeing, okay, this is a great spot for Gardevoir to want to protect because it doesn't want to eat this Fake Out. He's going to cover that slot anyway, just to make sure. But knowing that Salamence is going to be safe all the way around, get the Intimidate on Landorus that would have brought it to -2. Salamence was in a great position to come in here.
No, it's a smart switch on both players' ends, though, because now Preston has the Fake Out option with his own Incineroar, and it's a chance for Gardevoir to get off another Hyper Voice. The Hyper Voice may not be able to knock out Ethan's Incineroar. Won't even get the chance, but it will definitely knock out the Salamence should it be able to connect.
And we see that Amoonguss coming back in here with full HP thanks to that Regenerator ability. Ethan isn't going to take any chances here, is going to go ahead and protect the Salamence, making actually a really smart move not to Mega Evolve here, because that means that it still has the Intimidate ability, which kind of opens him up for more options later. So if he saw Landorus come back out, he would still be able to switch out Salamence, bring an Incineroar, recycle, reshuffle all these Intimidates around. Once you've Mega Evolved that Salamence, you're kind of stuck with the Aerial Aid ability.
Yeah, exactly. If you're ever going to protect your Salamence before it's Mega Evolved, it's definitely smarter to leave it in that non-Mega form because you do want to preserve that Intimidate option. The Amoonguss is pretty heavily threatened by both of these Pokemon right now, but it looks like Gardevoir might be in range to get knocked out by an attack from the Salamence, and so Ethan might be able to play a little bit more loose with the Amoonguss from here on.
Yeah, and Incineroar is going to come back out, again, shuffling through these Intimidates, just trying to make sure that the opposing Incineroars aren't doing any huge amount of damage, and then Ethan making, again, really smart switches. We saw this yesterday quite a bit with really good positioning in the Kansas City area. A lot of these players just trying to find good board positioning to where they can get a nice advantage over their opponent. And Ethan going for it, just hitting this Dragon Dance here in the face of a Hyper Voice, maybe thinking that Gardevoir is going to switch out.
It's
but wow, that was a really impressive survival. I'm going to be honest, I did not expect that.
I did not either. That's huge. Obviously showing that the Salamence is, pretty bulky. He Dragon Danced up in front of a Gardevoir, either expecting it to switch, potentially fearing something like a return or a double edge, or even knowing that if Preston did decide to get risky and stay in Hyper Voice, he could possibly survive one. So that was a really bold play on Ethan's end, and I don't know if I want to say it worked out because the Salamence is now at 5 HP and it really can't take any other attack, but he does have the +1 speed and attack, so yeah, he's kind of in the driver's seat as far as offense goes.
The nice thing that we've seen out of Ethan's Salamence yesterday is that it has frustration, so it's not double-edged, so it's not going to take any recoil. So as long as he can keep this Salamence safe, keep it free from taking any Z moves or anything, he might be able to keep this Salamence around for quite a while.
Looks like he's going to take 2 knockouts here too. His frustration is able to knock out the Incineroar +1, and Thunderbolt will finish off that Gardevoir.
Man, so yeah, a risky play to get that Dragon Dance, but I mean, paying dividends there, picking up a clean KO on that Incineroar, which I believe was basically from full health.
I think it was at exactly full. That's a pretty impressive knockout. I'm kind of surprised Preston didn't choose to switch in his Landorus. He would have gotten that Intimidate off on the Salamence, and if he called the slot correctly, he could have absorbed that Thunderbolt as well. But instead, he just opted to, let both of his Pokemon get knocked out.
Yeah, and so now Ethan, after taking that double knockout there, Landorus we've seen probably not with a Choice Scarf, so that leaves a few options, and Ethan is probably processing those options right now. trying to figure out, okay, is this like an Assault Vest Landorus, so he's not going to be able to protect, or is this going to be a Z Landorus, which at that point, Salamence is only really worried about Rock Slides, right?
Right, yeah. We do see that Protect coming down, so it is pretty likely to be holding something like a Z Crystal, like you mentioned.
So at that point, that frustration going straight into Landorus, this does kind of open up Zapdos with only taking a Thunderbolt to be a Volt Switch to be able to set up maybe a Tailwind this turn, make that Landorus, which we know was a lot slower than that Tapu Koko, maybe able to outspeed everything on the field now.
Yeah, solid play from Preston for sure. He put his Landorus in a spot where it's no longer intimidated. You know, Ethan's 2 Intimidate options are gone. The Salamence is now going to be slower than the Landorus and the Zapdos, most likely. He's got this Amoonguss staring him down, which he doesn't really want to see because both of his Pokemon are, not touching the ground. They're immune. They're not affected by the electric terrain, so they can actually both be put to sleep.
Yeah.
Something's going to be worried about. But, I think we already saw the Rock Slide from Landorus. That's a pretty free option here. We'll be able to knock out that Salamence. Get a little bit of damage on the Amoonguss as well.
Yeah, so Salamence is going to go ahead and protect, and we'll have to see what Ethan wants to do with this Amoonguss here. That HP, probably Ice, and then a knockoff to try and get rid of any berry, which he does get out. Amoonguss going for that Spore. Landorus is going to take a quick nap.
A good play from Ethan. Even though Preston read the Protect on Salamence, he does get this Landorus to sleep, and the Landorus is guaranteed to stay asleep this turn. And by putting Landorus to sleep instead of Zapdos, he's now able to Rage Powder. If he had put Zapdos to sleep, the Landorus could have avoided Rage Powder by clicking Rock Slide. But since Landorus is asleep, Salamence is guaranteed to have a turn to get off an attack here. So he'll be able to get off something like a Frustration under this Landorus, potentially go for a Roost, like you said. That would actually be it's actually a pretty great spot to go for Roost now.
Yeah, and here comes this Rage Powder. And because Zapdos currently resists any of these frustrations thanks to that Aerialate ability, Hidden Power Ice going to come in here into the Amoonguss. Amoonguss surviving, and another Dragon Dance coming out of Ethan. He really wants to bolster his attack here.
Another option too. He does get up to +1 attack again. He's at +2 speed, so it looks like he'll probably be able to outspeed this Landorus and Zapdos, even though the Tailwind is still up on Preston's end. So now, at this point, it may come down to whether this Landorus can wake up and protect. If the Salamence does get a Frustration off into Landorus, it most likely will be able to knock it out, thanks to that +1 boost. And so, Ethan, instead of going for the safer roost, he decides to go for a Dragon Dance and try and get his attack and speed up even faster.
And that Thunderbolt from Zapdos, knowing that, hey, if that Rage Powder comes out of Amoonguss, then it's going to pick up the KO there. And then I'm not sure if he's covering all the options. I don't know if Zapdos is covering all the options, but knowing that Hidden Power Ice is a fairly weak move, a pretty solid choice just to cover kind of everything. And then...
Well, I think Preston's scared of the Salamence now. It is at +1, +2. If the Amoonguss Rage Powder, he knocks out the Amoonguss anyway, so it doesn't really matter. If Salamence doesn't protect, then he gets to knock it out. And so the smart play from Ethan there, going for that Spore into Zapdos. He just kind of had to bank on the Landorus not waking up that turn, but it did work out for him. So he does get this big Frustration off into the Landorus, and it will be able to knock it out. So now it's a 3v1 in Ethan's favor.
Yeah, and especially now that you've got Tapu Koko out in a freshly set electric terrain, that means that all of his Volt Switches and Thunderbolts will be doing maximum amounts of damage. I don't think that we've seen an item out of this Zapdos yet. So a Thunderbolt that doesn't quite pick up the KO, or a Frustration that brings it down below 25% might activate a Pinch Berry if there is one. And it does barely hang on there.
50% berry. Wiki Berry getting it just over half again, but this Thunderbolt going to do a pretty solid amount of damage, and it does actually pick up the knockout. That's actually impressive.
That is really nice. A great positioning battle there. It looks like those Dragon Dances that Ethan put together, again, a very calculated risk taken by Ethan, setting up that Dragon Dance in the face of a Hyper Voice Gardevoir, but be able to take a Hyper Voice from that Gardevoir, surviving with 5 HP, which is something that I think Preston will have to take note of later on. That's fake out chip damage worth of clearing it out.
The calculated risk, I think, is a pretty good way to sum up that game. There were a few turns where Ethan took a couple risks. Dragon Dancing in front of the Gardevoir, protecting the Salamence and going for Spore into Zapdos. But each of them paid off for him, and so if he's able to make a few more of those calculated risks and come out on the better end, he's going to be in a pretty good position for the second game as well.
And so one thing that I would like to note is that we saw out of this Zapdos, we saw Tailwind, we saw Thunderbolt, and we saw Hidden Power Ice, but what we did not see was Heat Wave. And so that to me suggests that maybe it is lacking the Heat Wave. So if his best option to deal with this Amoonguss was Hidden Power Ice, I mean, that could limit what his opportunities are. And that's something that Ethan's going to keep track of. And knowing that Amoonguss is going to be able to redirect maybe 100% of Zapdos' moves.
I think if you see Hidden Power Ice, you can pretty safely rule out Heat Wave. Usually Zapdos will have to pick between the two, because they're going to be running Thunderbolt and Tailwind and Roost, and then one more coverage attack. And so it's a really good point. Amoonguss is pretty safe in front of Zapdos, even though Hidden Power Ice is super effective. We saw Amoonguss only take 30-40% from it, and so it's a very
enough,
comfortable.
That's enough to proc a Pinch Berry, and still be able to survive, as well as switch out or Regenerator and pick up one more HP Ice there. All right, so we are going into Game 2. The score is currently Ethan Simpson 1 game to Preston Chew with currently 0, but we are early in this series.
Absolutely, yes. Anything can happen here still. We do see the Landorus and the Gardevoir on Preston's end, and the Incineroar and Tapu Koko on Ethan's.
All right. Again, we apologize for the little bit of graphical errors going on. We will adjust this in the interim between matches. There's nothing that Jake and I can currently do about it because we are not at the venue. We are commentating from a distance. So I'd like to I'd like to point out that this is a fairly similar lead out from Preston, but he's changed the Intimidator.
Intimidator's changed, and it's kind of better for Ethan in this spot, I think, because now he doesn't have to worry about, who is Preston going to fake out? Is my Incineroar faster? Can I get a fake out off first? Ethan has a pretty free fake out into either slot, and now that we see that the Landorus is on the field, and so if the Tapu Koko does decide to go for that Z move immediately, there's no chance that the Landorus could switch in and absorb it either.
And the nice thing here, seeing that Ethan is actually switching things up too. Bringing this Celesteela, knowing that Celesteela not going to take a whole lot from Gardevoir, going to be able to do super effective damage to this Gardevoir should it decide to. We see no Protect out of this Gardevoir, taking a Volt Switch pretty freely, and Ethan able to Volt Switch out and maybe even bring in another Intimidate to reduce the attack of this Landorus one more time.
Does decide to opt for that Amoonguss, though. We're going to see a Z move straight out of the way from Preston. It's going to be that Ground EMZ. And if Ethan did switch to Celesteela onto this Ground EMZ, that's going to be a huge turn for him.
Oh, full force Z move. It doesn't affect Celesteela.
What a great turn one for him. It takes almost no damage from this Hyper Voice. He completely negates the Z move on Preston's end, and so it's a very smart switch up from Ethan. He showed that he didn't bring the Celesteela game 1, so Preston's going to be a little bit more, willing to just go straight for that Tectonic Rage, but Ethan calls that perfectly well, brings the Celesteela into the Incineroar slot, and prevents that Tectonic Rage from doing any damage.
And it is kind of interesting to think about that at the beginning of this game, I mentioned that we are far from over, but there is a little bit of a mentality here that, okay, I lost the first game, I can't lose one more, right? And so sometimes what ends up happening is that you want to rush things out. We saw in the first game, Preston took his time, he pressed Protect, made sure to absorb a Z move from that Tapu Koko. And this time it seems like he's rushing a little bit more, and that kind of impacts how players think through their turns.
This is a heavy slam. Oh no, it is just a Leech Seed. So he does decide to get a Leech Seed off on the Landorus, potentially expecting something to switch into Incineroar, Incineroar being a pretty good answer to Celesteela. But he does get this Tapu Koko in, takes a Psychic on the way in, so not exactly a safe turn, but it is able to fire off that Z move if it would like to, and the Celesteela does have a Leech Seed on this Landorus, and so a Celesteela that's already at pretty high health that has a Leech Seed going, never really something you want to see.
Right. And, Tapu Koko taking that Psychic was still maybe a little bit better than the Amoonguss taking that. And he's capable of protecting here. Kind of scouting out to see if there's going to be a Protect from this Gardevoir, which there is. Not wanting to burn that Z move again like he did in the first game. And so it looks like Gardevoir protecting itself from any Earthquakes here. And Celesteela trying to Heavy Slam that Gardevoir as well.
Yeah, a smart Protect on Ethan's end. He scouts for both the Protect on Gardevoir and the Earthquake from the Landorus. And now he has a pretty safe, Gigavolt Havoc into that Gardevoir slot. We saw Thunderbolt being able to knock it out from, around 45%, so I'd be very surprised if Gigavolt Havoc doesn't pick up Gardevoir here. And based on what Preston brought last game, the Incineroar and the Zapdos won't enjoy taking a Gigavolt Havoc either, and so unless Preston, switched up his Pokemon, he's not really going to have a safe time, or fun time against this Gigavolt Havoc.
Yeah, Gigavolt Havoc is actually a really safe move, and we see that Ethan identifies that, because if that goes into the Gardevoir slot, that's a Mega taken directly off the field. And Preston really doesn't have any switch-ins to take this Gigavolt Havoc because his Landorus is on the field. So if we saw that he has the Incineroar in the back, or if he brought any of his other 6 Pokemon, that would be devastating to those as well. And Gardevoir's HP just kind of evaporates there.
Yeah. Gigavolt Havoc takes out the Gardevoir right away. Landorus goes for the Rock Slide, not wanting to, attack its own teammates, should it, the Gardevoir be surviving. But Celesteela flinches and Tapu Koko survives. So kind of a win and a loss for Ethan there. The Koko survives for one more turn, able to get another attack off. But the Celesteela, unfortunately flinching, could have potentially got some, pretty good Heavy Slam damage off in that Landorus.
And now we do see this Incineroar, which I think is Preston's probably best answer to the Celesteela, and a good one at that. And at this point, with Fake Out potential here, Tapu Koko does not want to eat a Fake Out here with 5 HP. And, if Ethan wants to bring in Incineroar here, he's going to be thinking twice about that because Landorus Rock Slides.
Good point. Landorus is pretty primed to just keep looking Rock Slide here, and the Incineroar coming in on Ethan's end. It would intimidate the Landorus, so it wouldn't be too detrimental, but still, Rock Slide is super effective. Landorus does have that pretty strong attack stat, and so it's not kind of an interesting spot for Ethan here.
Mm-hmm. And it looks like Preston trying to take advantage, knowing that it's going to be a tough spot for Tapu Koko to try and get any damage out here. Just going to try and freely bring out this Zapdos. And Celesteela also coming off the field. It looks like we are dealing with a little bit more graphical issues, but we are going to be seeing Incineroar come out here, and what I assume is probably a Tapu Koko Protect. Yep, there we go. The graphics finally caught up. We've got to Protect here so that Tapu Koko is not eating that Fake Out. And I think that's a smart call from Preston, knowing that Tapu Koko isn't really going to want to take that Fake Out, and then just going ahead and preventing Celesteela's slot from being able to do anything, and just going for the Fake Out there, making sure that Zapdos comes in with no damage on it.
It is a smart play. He correctly identifies that the Tapu Koko doesn't want to take a Fake Out. He does Fake Out the Celesteela slot instead. Not really too much of a big deal for Ethan because he did switch out that Incineroar, but now Ethan does have a Fake Out option of his own. He can Volt Switch out of there with Tapu Koko. The electric terrain's gone, so we would probably like to reset that if he can. Mm-hmm. And so we do know that Ethan still has the Celesteela, and I don't think we've seen his 4th Pokemon yet, but you might want to assume it's Salamence just because you typically are going to bring your Megas, and that's what kind of won him the game last time.
And so we do see Preston taking Incineroar out of here, not wanting to take Volt Switch damage on that, and then making sure that he gets gets an Intimidate on Ethan's Incineroar, and then Zapdos going ahead and protecting, which, again, trying to prevent all Volt Switch damage here, it looks like, and then any Fake Out potential.
It absolutely does prevent any Volt Switches. The Landorus immune, Zapdos protecting, but now, considering Zapdos just protected, the Tapu Koko still has a pretty free Volt Switch into that slot. And the Protect on Zapdos is interesting because we usually don't see that. They'll usually run Roost in favor of Protect, but Preston, knowing he has that Wiki Berry, opts for the Protect instead.
And Ethan going ahead and taking a little bit of time there to decide where he wants to be, bringing out Celesteela, knowing that Zapdos, even if he brings Tapu Koko back out, will not receive the benefit of the electric terrain. And Incineroar actually taking that Earthquake fairly well, given that that's super effective and boosted by the same type attack bonus, but not able to take the Thunderbolt afterward.
Yeah, a smart play from Preston. It covers the potential for Incineroar surviving that Earthquake with the Thunderbolt. If the Tapu Koko had stayed in, the Earthquake would have knocked it out, and so, the Zapdos kind of gets a free Thunderbolt off there. And we see Amoonguss though, so he brought he brought Celesteela in favor of the Salamence.
Mm. Which I think Ethan identifying that Intimidate not necessarily helping out against Zapdos or the Hyper Voice. Wow, where did my words go? So Amoonguss is going to go ahead and get knocked off here. And then it looks like a Thunderbolt into that Celesteela, which is doing a huge amount of damage. That is impressive. I think that suggests quite a bit about this Zapdos.
Yeah, it's probably pretty safe to assume it's something like a modest Zapdos. He might have a little bit more of a special attack investment. Thunderbolt does do a lot, and that kind of does explain the choice of Protect as well. If you have a more offensive Zapdos, you might want to be, preserving it a little bit more with that Protect. But, Ethan does get the Spore off into Zapdos. So Zapdos will be guaranteed to stay asleep this turn, and he does have the Leech Seed going. I wouldn't be surprised to see something like an Incineroar switch in now, get the Intimidate off on Celesteela, threaten the Amoonguss with a Flare Blitz, and kind of cancel that Leech Seed. But, both Preston and Ethan have a few options here, but kind of right now at this point, it looks like Preston might be in the driver's seat.
Yeah, and Landorus is going to go ahead and Protect. It looks like Preston wants to burn out a couple sleep turns here. And that'll prevent Celesteela from setting up Leech Seeds, which Celesteela is wont to do, and it prevents Landorus from going to sleep here as well. So Celesteela is going to recover a little bit of HP, but otherwise, not a whole lot done this turn. Just burning off a sleep turn on Zapdos.
Play on Preston's end. The Zapdos isn't really threatened by the Celesteela or the Amoonguss as far as damage goes, and so by protecting Landorus, he does block the Spore and the Leech Seed, and it gives Zapdos it gives Zapdos a chance to wake up this turn as opposed to, having no chance to attack. And so, pretty smart play on Preston's end.
All right, and Preston deciding that, all right, I've taken enough Leech Seed damage and burned a couple turns of sleep, so Zapdos is out, Incineroar is in, reducing a little bit of heavy slam damage that's going to come off of this Celesteela, and then we'll see what he wants to do with this Landorus, and it looks like where there's a Rock Slide, there is a way. He's going to just spam Rock Slide, maybe, and go to town. This time, Ethan Celesteela immune to the flinches, and going ahead and setting up that Leech Seed. Man.
Another smart play on Preston's end, too, because he does get that Intimidate off. He's got a Fake Out option, and he knew that, if his Zapdos did wake up that turn, Ethan might be scared of taking a Thunderbolt, so he's probably going to Rage Powder. It wouldn't really have done any damage, or the Zapdos wouldn't really have done much damage to that Amoonguss, and so, getting this into Incineroar in on a turn where there's not really a threat of Spore or Leech Seed was a very, very good play.
And it looks like more fighting for positioning here. Knowing that Preston wants to keep that Landorus awake, protecting this Incineroar, keeping Zapdos in, or bringing Zapdos back in just in case there's a Spore in that Landorus slot, resetting these Leech Seeds, and then preventing Celesteela from really getting anything done here.
Yeah, so it looks like Incineroar is primed to take a knockout this turn. Anything that Flare Blitz connects with will knock it out at this point. We got the Tapu Koko at very low health, and then Amoonguss and Celesteela are both weak to that Flare Blitz, and so if Incineroar is able to get off a Flare Blitz, it will very likely result in a knockout.
And I really like this play from Preston. He gets that nice wake up on Zapdos, so he gets the Tailwind, making sure that everything on his side of the field is fairly quick, and then going for this Flare Blitz with Incineroar directly into that Amoonguss, which he weakened down to just above half so that he didn't proc that Pinch Berry, which actually I think was a knockoff as well, so there wasn't going to be a Pinch Berry anymore. But Amoonguss going straight down, and that's eliminating all of the capability of Ethan to put everything to sleep. And now that Tapu Koko is going to come out, Incineroar should be faster, potentially, with this Tailwind. But I mean, even at low health, Zapdos can clear that out as well.
This is a very well played endgame on Preston's end. That Tailwind pretty much seals it up. The Tapu Koko being at such low health means that it will be able to be knocked out by anything from the Zapdos. And we still have the Incineroar threatening Celesteela with a big Flare Blitz. And so, it's looking like Preston's in a prime position to take this game 2 and force it to game 3.
Yeah, so, I mean, just fantastic positioning from Preston here. That Thunderbolt does clear out the Tapu Koko, and we can assume that this is probably a Flare Blitz going into Celesteela. And so we see this adjustment by Ethan here, really kind of, I think, respecting Gardevoir maybe a little bit too much, wanting to make sure that he's got all the pieces in place with Celesteela to eat a Psychic or a Hyper Voice that is now a Fairy typing. But I think without that Salamence there, he was missing a couple pieces.
I felt like Ethan didn't have as much, offense coming his way that game because he didn't have that Salamence. He did have that Celesteela instead. And so Celesteela, while it does have those powerful heavy slams, since it is so heavy, it's more known for being just something that sits around and fires off leech seeds. And so, yeah, I definitely agree with that. Ethan, what won him game 1 was being aggressive with his, strong offensive Pokemon, and he just didn't do that game 2. So he's going to have to decide, if he wants to go back to the Salamence, see if he can start Dragon Dancing again. Maybe not take a Hyper Voice this time, but, he did do that game 1 and it won. So, Ethan and Preston both, played very strong games individually in games 1 and 2, and now it's going to be fun to see how they both adjust for game 3.
Yeah, and definitely from Ethan's side, making some of those calculated risks might be in his best interest. We saw how well it paid off that game 1. And then seeing that game 1 and game 2, Preston brought all the same pieces to the puzzle, but just kind of changed the order to make sure that they fit the right way.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Preston, knew what went wrong in game 1. He did bring the same 4 Pokemon in game 2, but he just played it a lot better. The Protect on Incineroar we saw on Preston's end, kind of an interesting option because, a lot of times, I think we were talking about earlier how Incineroar can run Assault Vest or it can run, the bulky Pinch Berry sets, and, by showing that Protect, it obviously cannot be holding an Assault Vest, and so it's probably safe to assume it is holding something like a Pinch Berry.
Yeah, so that could give you an indication of how it's trained. Maybe some more defensive investments, just to try and keep that bulk going. So we are going into game 3. The current tally is 1-1. And it looks like we are still struggling a little bit with some of our graphical glitches, so please bear with us. We'll try and get that fixed in the interim between rounds. And now Preston going for a completely different look on game 3, as well as Ethan.
Yeah, new leads from both of them. We see the Tapu Koko and the Salamence from Ethan, and the Zapdos and the Gardevoir from Preston. And both of these Pokemon on Preston's end pretty heavily threatened by that Gigavolt Havoc. But it's pretty safe to assume that Preston does have that Landorus in the back, and so Ethan has to be really careful about pulling the trigger on that Z move, unless he wants to, blow his Z move into an immunity like Preston did last game.
And so, no Intimidate out here for Preston. So this Salamence getting a Dragon Dance, Intimidates in the back that would be able to cycle through, but that's still extra damage potential. But having this Zapdos out here, that's a chance to make sure that you get your Tailwind up and you're going to be at least faster for one turn. And as you said, having Landorus available in the back to eat a Z move, and get Intimidate out here, it's an interesting way of changing things up, and I really like it.
Yeah, we do see the Landorus come in, so Preston potentially trying to Preston potentially hoping to catch that Gigavolt Havoc, or just something like a Volt Switch or a Thunderbolt for some damage. And does get the Intimidate off onto that Salamence as well.
And it could be that Preston's assuming that Hyper Voice was maybe just a damage roll, bringing that Intimidate out here.
Oh boy.
Z move. Z move time.
This is going to be important. If this goes into the Gardevoir, this is a huge turn for Ethan because he potentially could just get a knockout and a Dragon Dance. But if it's into the Landorus, oh, there it is.
Oh no. Straight into Landorus, trying to prevent that Tailwind. So he does get the Dragon Dance. Hyper Voice, if that was a damage roll, this could be a very risky play for Ethan. But is it another calculated risk? It looks like it is a critical hit on Tapu Koko, but that may not have made a difference. So on this first turn, Ethan has traded a Tapu Koko for a Dragon Dance, and Salamence is now at +0 attack with +1 speed, thanks to that Intimidate from Landorus. And based on what we saw in the last 2 games, Preston might still have another Intimidate in the back. And I don't even think that we've seen all of Landorus's moves, so there still could be like a U-turn on there, just to bring everything.
Yeah, I think we saw Earthquake, Rock Slide, Knock Off, and Protect, I believe.
Okay.
And so
we have seen all 4 moves.
Right, but it does have the Rock Slide, which definitely will be able to knock out Salamence from here. That's a very risky turn from Ethan there. Like you mentioned, those calculated risks. He wanted to get rid of that Zapdos, so he didn't have. So Preston no longer had the Tailwind option. So if the Salamence did get the Dragon Dance up, it would always be the fastest thing on the field. Unfortunately, Preston does see that coming, switches the Landorus into that Gigavolt Havoc, and gets off a huge Hyper Voice. Luckily getting that crit on Tapu Koko as well. So that just kind of eliminates one of Ethan's options.
I do like bringing this Incineroar out. On Preston's side, he has to kind of guess, all right, which side is this fake out coming to? And then Preston just making a decision, you know what, I know that this Salamence really wants to deal a lot of damage, so I'm just going to reduce this. And Ethan's really going for it. He might feel like he's in a corner here, and this Gardevoir from Preston going for this Hyper Voice, and it looks like those 2 Dragon Dances are for nothing. That Salamence and Tapu Koko going down for 0 damage.
Just trying to make 2 big reads these 2 turns, and both of them just didn't pan out for him. Especially the second turn, he might have felt he was kind of had his back against a wall. If he was able to get that turn right, he could have put himself in a pretty alright position to try and make it come back. But the Preston doesn't fall for it, just goes straight for that Hyper Voice and is able to knock out the Salamence. So we do just see Ethan forfeit.
Well, it was definitely a great game of adjustments from both sides. Ethan definitely trying to take those calculated risks, as we mentioned, that was what got him the win in the first game. And then, unfortunately, just not quite calculating the risks accurately in the third game, thinking that he had a read on Preston, thinking that that Gardevoir was going to protect, and Preston reading right into that and saying, you know what, this is my best option.
Yeah, no, Preston, after taking that game 1 loss, he definitely, it looked like he brought the same 4 Pokemon to this third game as well. I don't think we saw his 4th. But, a very, very well played game from Preston.
Absolutely. So we're going to take a quick break, try and address some of these graphical issues. We will see you for round 2 in a few moments.